All right. Hope everyone is doing well. Welcome to our mental health ministry. We thank you all for joining. Um, ask everybody if you're watching on Facebook or on YouTube, if you could do me a favor and go ahead and share the post. I would be extremely appreciative. Again, if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, please go ahead and share the post, and I will be extremely appreciative. All right. And what I'm going to do, we're doing a part two of our last conversation when love feels one sided, a spiritual look at love. And so I'm just going to play for you a couple minutes of the last conversation, and then our coordinator, John Parker, will pick up and take over for part two. But I'm going to play just a couple minutes of the discussion from part one to give you a chance to kind of get an idea of what we were dealing with. I want you to. I would challenge you to keep the where to yourself, and but you know what the where is. Where do I feel like my love or effort is being one-sided? And I would invite you to share what are the emotions that rise up in you when you think about that thing that you're going to keep to yourself. What are the emotions? So you can see kind of how they might be affecting you, physically or spiritually. Anybody would like to share that? What are the emotions that rise up in that thing that you're thinking about, but you don't need to share with us? But what are the emotions?
I can share.
Okay.
So I would say I think frustration is kind of like frustration. And I think for me too, what I realized is that sometimes when I'm doing these things, it's like also maybe a form of control. It means like I want something from the person, or I want this thing to be a certain way, so I'm doing all this stuff, and it's not necessarily giving me the results I want. So then I'm frustrated or anxious or upset. And so I think for me, at least, when I give it to God, then it helps relieve some of that anxiety.
So I have a question. So the emotion that you just talked about, frustration, that comes up. How do you think frustration impacts you as a person?
Inability to sleep, being mean to my kids, not being able to focus on the things I need to focus on, just kind of distracts me. And I'm sure it impacts my health as well as my physical health.
And so I really think that that's the real value right there, is being able to identify this is what happened. But I think sometimes we don't dig deeper to find out, well, how does this thing, because we feel like we're Superman or Superwoman and I can handle it. But the reality is so many other areas. It's one emotion, but I think you just named like 5 or 6 different things that it impacts negatively. And so we can really begin to put a value on how that thing affects me, because sometimes I think, as John mentioned earlier, sometimes we just decide, you know what, I can cope with it, I can live with it, but when that thing is really actually doing some major damage to us, but we're not really acknowledging the damage that is done because we may not drill down. I know it frustrates me, but how does frustration affect me as a person? And now I looked at, now it's affecting the way, and I don't want to hurt my children, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that. But I think that's some drilling down that we got to do. How is this thing affecting us, and should I really look at ways to not allow either the emotion or deal with the thing that's causing the emotion? What are your thoughts?
This is Delphine.
Okay.
The feeling that I think of is the feeling of, you give so much and you find yourself wondering if you're worthy because it is one-sided, or you're not getting back what you're putting in, so it leaves you kind of with the feeling of being unworthy. Yeah.
All right, so that was just a snippet of our conversation in part one, and we're going to put it in Dr. Parker's hand. And you can also, on the email that you received, if you received the notice, part one is also on there. We sent it out a little earlier today, just so you can have a chance to go through it if you want to go back and check out part one. But for our conversation, when love feels one sided, we'll put it in the hand of our coordinator, Dr. John Parker.
All right, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Let me go ahead and share my slides so y'all can see what we got going on. But yes, I appreciate everyone for joining in. We had a very good conversation last time, and as always, I learned a few things myself. But we'll start right now with kind of where we left off. So we left off kind of talking about a reflection question, and where do I feel like my love or effort is one-sided? What emotions rise up in me when I think of that relationship? So quick recap outside of what Pastor Roll's already playing. We just having a conversation about, hey, this is what love is. This is what love isn't. This is how love should feel. This isn't how love should feel. And what does a person do when they feel like they're giving their all and they're not receiving the same type of love they feel like they should get in return? So we got to the point where we were talking about what does the spiritual framework look like for love? And then even if there's some one-sidedness happening. So God's love, self-worth, and then setting boundaries. Oftentimes, I think we don't set enough boundaries with people, even our spouses, even our loved ones. And oftentimes those lack of boundaries can get in the way and, just make us feel a certain way. I think we were talking last week, Sister Delphine mentioned that she, with her grandchildren, she's had to set some boundaries and stuff for her kids. And so sometimes, even when it's a loving relationship and you want to be there for your kids and you want to be there for your grandkids, sometimes you got to do for self. And that may get in the way of things. And when you have to set those boundaries with people, it can kind of make things kind of awkward. So we'll kind of delve into that a little bit. All right. So when we think about God's love versus human relationships, God's love is constant. It's not contingent upon performance. Oftentimes, when we're in a relationship with people, the love that's found, the love that's felt is definitely dependent on performance. I think Janet Jackson had the song, "What Have You Done For Me Lately?" I don't know. I don't remember all the context of that song, but I do feel like oftentimes, just because of human nature, love is often dependent upon performance. What are you doing? What have you done? And when that's not happening, we feel some type of way, but we got to remember that God's love is constant. Human love, even in Christian settings, is imperfect and can be unbalanced. And the issue with that is that sometimes we get into religious circles, we get into our church circles, we get into places where we feel like people should behave a certain way or should love us a certain way or should do certain things for us. We're imperfect. We're just human beings. And sometimes we make mistakes. Sometimes we don't do right by people unintentionally. Sometimes it may be intentional. And when we compare people to God, human love is imperfect and it's unbalanced. It just doesn't always meet the expectations or match up to what we expect it to be. And then identity is rooted in being a beloved child of God, not in whether one person chooses or values you. So the idea there is that, hey, when you're a child of God and you understand that God cares for you, that's where your identity is rooted. So that love that's consistent, that love that's perfect, that love that's balanced, that comes from God, when we understand that and when we're living in that realm, we're not offset. And we shouldn't be. We can't be. Anything can happen, but we don't have to be offset when someone in particular that we want to love us or to treat us a certain way or to love us the way we love them doesn't choose or value us. Now, that doesn't mean that we stick around in relationships or be around people or beg people to love us, because we want to be valued by them. But we just understand that if we are in committed relationships, if it's a marriage, if it's a friendship, if it's a brother-sister bond, whatever that looks like, even if we don't feel valued, if we understand that we are valued, that we are loved, that we are cared for, we should be able to balance the expectations of that person's love towards you and how God sees us. And when we have that balance, we're able to, not be let down when people don't value us like they should or like we feel that they should. Any questions there? And so when we think about healthy Christ-like love, I kind of put things together like in 3 pillars. And so the first pillar, if these were holding up our building, I guess, 2 pillars can hold up stuff. For 3 pillars, we'll just have a building with 3 pillars. So there's worth. Every person bears God's image. Your value does not decrease because someone else fails to cherish you. And when I see people in counseling or different sessions or different places, oftentimes when we don't see that we've been created in the image of God, the likeness of God, that he made us and said, man, that's good. Our value decreases when someone else doesn't show you the love that you expect. And so we kind of talk about these things like, hey, is your worth found in who God says you are, or is your worth found in who that person says you are? And it starts at young ages. It's crazy enough. I'm having conversations with my daughter on the way to school. She's in the 6th grade, and she's telling me that one of her friends is dating a guy who likes someone else, and everybody else knows that he likes someone else. And so I'm having a conversation with her. I was like, well, she's got low self-esteem. She's got low self-worth. And it was interesting to find out that she has a dad at home, and I was surprised by that fact. But I was like, well, even, telling my daughter, even though she has a dad at home, and hopefully he's doing the things that build her up, if she still finds herself at 11 years old, having a boyfriend and knowing that boyfriend likes somebody else, and she's still fighting to be with this person, that's a sign of low self-worth on her end. And so I was encouraging my daughter, like, hey, talk to her about God's love, maybe bring some scriptures to her, talk about different things. But at the end of the day, if she doesn't know her worth, and if she doesn't know that she was made in the image of God and God finds value in her, finds worth in her, she's going to live a life of disappointment. The other pillar is mutuality, where possible. And with mutualities, healthy relationships include give and take, listening, and share responsibility. We've talked about it in other mental health talks when we talk about relationships. And so sometimes we do have relationships that are one-sided, like, hey, this person's a mentor, they pour into me, and they don't expect anything from me. And all I do is just sit back and tell them my problems and figure out my life, and they help me do that. And some relationships are 50-50, where, hey, I pour into you, you pour to me, I ask questions, you ask questions, you give me answers, I give you answers, and you have that mutual relationships where it's just something that both people feel filled with. They feel full after conversations, and they don't feel like they're just giving, and not giving anything back. There's active listening. You probably have been in relationships with people where all they want to do is talk, tell you about their problems, tell you about their life, tell you about their issues, and they don't really leave room for you to talk about yourself, to talk about your feelings, to talk about what you have going on. And so again, that's where mutuality comes in, where you have the ability to talk and listen. And then again, the last thing is share responsibility. When you're in a relationship with someone and you don't want the love to feel one-sided, there is a necessary level of shared responsibility. Pastor gave a great example last week about sometimes, depending on what's going on with his wife, he might have to pick up the load and do what needs to be done. And he had to understand, if I'm not getting the story mixed up, there was times where he didn't understand what was going on, but he did what needed to be done without having the understanding. And I thought that was a great point, because oftentimes when we're in relationships with people, we want to know why. Well, why? You want me to do this? Well, why? You want me to do that? Well, why? And sometimes the why is not important. Sometimes it's just being there, showing up, and taking care of business, or picking up the slack, or whatever that looks like. And that's where shared responsibility comes in, mutuality. When you're in relationships and they're healthy, there's that shared responsibility. And sometimes you do have to pick up more of the slack, and sometimes the other person picks up the slack. But when you're constantly the one that's giving, doing, and getting nothing in return, or feeling as if you're not getting anything in return, it makes relationships very one-sided and very difficult to be in. And the last thing about the 3 pillars is boundaries. I kind of talked about it a little while ago. Jesus loved sacrificially, yet set limits. He withdrew to pray. He walked away from some situations, and he did not entrust himself to unsafe people. And so eventually we know he gave himself over to die on the cross for our sins, or whatever the case may be. But man, when he was tired, he went to sleep. Sometimes he had to go and pray on his own. Sometimes he had to go off to the mountain and lead the people and get away from the crowds. And so sometimes, even if the example is Jesus himself, you don't have to die from wearing out because people need you, or that you feel like something's not going to go right when you're not there. There was a older gentleman I had as a mentor when I was in my 20s, and his philosophy was, you wear out, you don't rust out, which can work in some situations. But when we're talking about good mental health and being even physically fit, you can't wear yourself into the ground. You can't work without rest. But his idea was like, hey man, we wear out, we don't rust out. But he also was a person that would fall asleep every 3 minutes when you're having a conversation with him. So I guess all that wearing out got to him eventually. But again, setting boundaries is something that we have to do, and it's very important, because if we don't set those boundaries, people run all over us. But also, it's good for a healthy relationship. A good, healthy relationship has boundaries. You don't want to be used, and you don't want to use other people. And so it's not about being mean or not being available, but boundaries are something that is healthy. And again, we can always blame Jesus. He withdrew when he needed to too. So we can just say we're trying to follow the example. Any questions there?
Oh, good stuff.
Okay. All right. So then we think about boundaries. I wanted to go a little further, just because I feel like boundaries is one of those things where it gets sticky for people, and people feel uncomfortable. I don't know what it's like to be a mom, but I feel like my wife often tells me, oh, well, the kids will listen to you, and the kids will this, and the kids will do that. And it's not because I think they don't have respect for their mother. I think it's just sometimes my boundaries are so not set in stone. They're a little flexible here and there, but because I set certain boundaries and the kids know they can't do this, they can't ask for that, they can't do this, they can't go there. They don't give me too many problems when I say no to things or when I set a rule about something. But they know with mom, if they ask long enough, she'll probably give in. They get the begging at the right time, especially if she's distracted with work or doing something else. The kids know. They know that, hey, mom's not paying attention. I'm gonna ask for that hot chocolate right now, and it's more than likely she's gonna say yes, right? And so that's a light boundary. But then sometimes we have to set real boundaries to protect our heart, to protect our body, to protect our calling, to protect our resources. And what that means is that when we feel as if I am somebody that God has given a talent, that's given a skill, that's given treasures, that's given things to just do what he's called us to do, when we don't set those boundaries, our heart can get messed up, our physical body can get messed up, the calling that he has for us can get messed up, and we can mess up resources, meaning our money, our value, or the things that we have. And so boundary setting is beyond just telling somebody no so that you can get some sleep. It's also about protecting what's yours and what God has called you to do. And another thing that happened in that the institution where I was a part of, where the thought was to wear out, not rust out, is that I was consistently tired and I was consistently worn out, and eventually I tapped out. Like I couldn't be a part of the organization anymore because I didn't have any energy left. And I feel like if I was listening to God's voice more instead of trying to impress this person, I wouldn't have got burnt out in the way that I did, because I would have been protecting my heart, would have been protecting my physical body and got some rest. I would have known that my calling is not your calling, and even though you want me to do more, I have to do what God has called me to do. And I burned through a lot of resources trying to keep up with the pace that was set in front of me. That wasn't what God was calling me to do. And so I had to learn that lesson. And trust me, to this day, boundaries is one of the things that aren't my problem. Saying no and setting boundaries and saying yes to the right things is definitely something I've learned to put into effect with full force. And saying no can be a way to say yes. And what I mean by that is like, hey, when you say I can't do this, I can't do that, it frees you up to be obedient to what God has called you to do. It frees up your health. You don't be like me and sleepy, standing up, falling at. I remember one time I fell asleep on my feet at the water fountain when I was at that institution. It was just like, I'm so tired on this Sunday morning at the 7 a.m. prayer service. I've been here every day this week. I literally fell asleep on my feet, and that can't be healthy long term. Not getting that rest, and then long term faithfulness. Sometimes we get involved with things that we shouldn't, that we have no business signing up for, that we shouldn't, participate in. And then it affects our long-term ability to be faithful to what that we need to do, our actual callings, things that God has called us to do, even work, even personal responsibilities. Oftentimes I can sign up for too many things in a week, and now I can't take my kid to practice, or I can't be available for the mental health ministry or different things. And so we have to be mindful when we set a boundary. We can't do everything, and it's not necessary to do everything. And saying no can set you up to say yes to the things that you actually need to do. And saying sometimes love looks like fewer responsibilities, clear expectations, and involving wise counsel. And what I mean by this is when you are loving someone well and you're in a relationship with people, fewer responsibilities oftentimes, again, gives you more space to do the things that you need to do. And being busy all the time for the sake of being busy doesn't allow you to love in the way that you should sometimes because you're absent and you're not available. And then clear expectations. When I'm meeting with certain clients, I have to tell them all the time, like, hey, you're mad at your spouse, or you're mad at this person, or you're mad at your auntie, or you're mad at your grandma because you have the wrong expectations. Or maybe they're setting boundaries and you don't respect their boundaries, or maybe you want to set boundaries and they don't respect your boundaries. But when you have conversations about expectations and what you expect and letting them know or hearing what they expect from you, you're in a space where, love can abound a little bit more. And oftentimes I have to tell people, with some people, you change your expectations. You don't have any expectations at all, or you limit your expectations because you can put too much expectations on someone or have the wrong expectations for that person. And then you're upset and feeling like you're the one that's doing all the work, that the love is one-sided, and so on and so forth. And the other person's just like, hey, this is all I'm going to do. And if you want to do more, that's on you. But if you don't have those conversations and know what those expectations are, it's very difficult to love in a way that's meaningful and doing what you need to do for that person. And it also involves wise counsel. If you feel like you're being used and played, if you feel like love is one-sided, get that wise counsel. With the therapist, with Big Mama, with your grandma, with somebody that got some sense in your family, with your pastor, whatever that looks like. You always want to seek wise counsel when we're talking about boundaries and we're talking about issues of love, especially when it comes to feeling one-sided. And I mentioned wise counsel because oftentimes we can feel like love is one-sided, but when someone that's not in the situation that can look out from the outside in can be like, hey, you know what? Maybe you're the problem. They don't necessarily have to say it like that, but they may be able to give you some wisdom and insight to say like, hey, maybe you're doing too much. Hey, maybe you're not doing enough. Hey, maybe you need to set boundaries so that you can love properly, you can feel loved, and you won't feel like your love is one-sided. But if we're just going off our own intuition, sometimes that can lead us into a bumpy road. And so we want to make sure that we get that wise counsel so that we can make sure that we're setting good boundaries and loving in the way that we should. I said a lot. Any questions there? Any comments, concerns?
Yeah, no, I think it could. I think those setting clear expectations could really help avoid confusion because sometimes we put stress on ourselves because we have expectations, but we may not have expressed those expectations, and then now you have disappointment that probably didn't necessarily need to develop, but because the expectations or the boundaries were not made clear, and then it grew into something more.
100%. Yeah. And it's interesting too, because I think that on some level, we, especially as believers, we feel as if, I don't know, being overworked or pushing through things or fighting for certain situations are what we're supposed to do because of some, Christian ethics or Christian ethos or something like that. And oftentimes it's not. Again, like the reason why I brought in the example of Jesus and him, dipping off when he needed to is because he God made the Sabbath. God was like, hey, on the seventh day, we rested. And so sometimes when it comes to boundaries, it's the same thing. You might need to set a boundary so that you can actually rest, so that you can actually recharge, so that you can be refreshed. Or you might need to set a boundary so that someone doesn't take advantage of you. Someone doesn't, get all your money, get all your time, get all your resources. Hey, no, you can't borrow my car today because I need it or I don't need it, but you just can't borrow the car. Just certain things where it feels hard and it feels harsh, but it's actually good boundaries are a sign of love and respect and what we need to have for ourselves and for other people. And I think it's too often that we conflate the two ideas and we confuse the two ideas and feel like we're not a good Christian if we're not, wearing out and we're not, doing things for people and we're not, constantly busy, and it doesn't have to be that way. And I don't know. I mean, Pastor Ross, you probably have way more experience with me, way more experience than me with having those conversations with people. But I just feel like I don't know how that happens or where that happens in people's Christian life. But it just seems like, it's somewhere along the line. In my experience, people just feel like they just got to do and got to be open for everything, got to say yes to everything, and then they wear themselves out or get sick or have a mental breakdown because they're just doing too much.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. That's it for that. Yeah, and there's some scriptures down there. Okay, we can slide on to the next thing. So oftentimes I don't get to this because we be having such good conversations and yapping. So I wanted to put this in early to make sure that it's actually there. So I wanted to have some practical tools and next steps about, caring for yourself, caring for your mental health, and making sure that, as much as possible, you can be in loving relationships and love people well and not feel as if you're one-sided. All right, and so caring for your mental health. When you are feeling as if your love is one-sided, when you're feeling as if your partner, your spouse, your friend, your cousin, your auntie, your uncle aren't loving you the way they should, and you're kind of, just doing things on your own or you're one-sided, name what you feel. And what I mean by name what you feel is oftentimes we bury emotions, we ignore signs, we ignore feelings, and we suppress them. But if you don't actually name the feeling that you have when, say, for instance, in my relationship, if my wife has got a new, 3-month-old baby, she's part-time working, she's dealing with kids, she's cooking, cleaning, doing all these things that she does, and then she, I'm not helping at all, or she feels like she's putting all the work and I'm just chilling, watching TV or watching the game or doing whatever, she has to name that feeling. Like, she has to put that down on a journal. She needs to pray honestly, or talk with somebody and have those conversations so that she doesn't worry those feelings or that she doesn't suppress them in such a way to where eventually she pops. And it's very important that we take that time. And oftentimes, again, this may be a male-female thing or it depends on your responsibility level. I've heard from a lot of male clients is that because they feel like they don't have time to name a feeling or deal with an emotion or deal with a feeling, they just suppress, and it ends up in a stroke. It ends up with stress. It ends up with the hair falling out. It ends up with all these different physical manifestations or mental health issues because they feel like they just got to keep going. Because if they don't stop, or if they stop, things will fall apart, or business won't get handled, or the kids won't eat, or whatever the case may be. But I have to remind them there's room to do those things, to be busy, to work, to provide, to do whatever it is that you do, but also feel your feelings and also to name your feelings. Because you can only get away with suppression for so long. And it's the age-old analogy of the shaking up the soda bottle. Eventually, you shake it so much, it's going to pop. And so what naming the feelings does, it helps you calm down, get back to baseline, really understand what it is you're feeling. Some of y'all may remember the feelings wheel that we talked about a couple of sessions ago, really knowing what it is you feel and talk about it. Again, whether you're journaling, whether you're praying, or whether you're talking with a friend or a counselor, whatever the case may be, we have to get those emotions out. We have to get those feelings out, and we have to talk about those things because it's going to be overwhelming, especially in a conversation like this when we're talking about one-sided love. Because if you keep feeling like it's one-sided and you don't talk about it and you don't get it out, you don't express it, it's definitely going to cause you to pop one day. And that could look, again, it could be physical health, mental health, or whatever the case may be. And seeking wise support. Again, this is always going to be my go-to. Talking to a counselor, life coach, pastor, a support group, familiar relationship or attachment issues, you have to seek wise counsel. Even if you're in a, like it says here, support group, oftentimes people will be dealing with loss. They'll be dealing with different things, and they have many support groups that can deal with that very specific issue. But again, if we're talking about love and we're talking about feeling like love is one-sided, there's plenty of groups that offer group therapy where you can just sit and listen. Maybe you're not, extroverted, and maybe you don't want to talk to a bunch of people. But it's kind of one of those things where, hey, if you just want to sit in a group, listen to everybody talk about what they got going on, and get help that way, those things are available. But seeking wise support is always, always, always important. Again, because I mentioned with this love and this one-sidedness, there's often times where we might be, what's the word I want to use? We might be nearsighted, farsighted, whatever the case may be. We may not see the own role that we play in the thing. And having that wise counsel allows us, hopefully, if you're talking to the right people, which would be wise counsel, to see things from a 360 lens and not just our perspective. And I'm telling you, more often than not, a lot of times when you point out to a person, hey, well, this is the role you play. You need to set better boundaries, say no sometimes, do this and that. Once you are able to talk to somebody and they're able to point those things out to you, life just gets much better. And the one-sided love kind of starts to balance itself out. And then build other life-giving connections. When you're so wrapped up in a person and only that person, and that person's your world, and now they're feeling you and you're feeling like this love is one-sided, without other life-giving connections, it's going to be very difficult to find meaning in life, to not have a mental health breakdown, to not have the physical ramifications of what you got going on. You got to have other friends. You got to have, places you go like church. You got to do some volunteering. You got to do some community service because you don't want that one relationship to define your whole world. You don't want that relationship to be the end-all be-all, especially, again, in this conversation where we're talking about one-sided love. If you're already feeling like the conversation or the love is going one way and you don't have any other outlets to experience good relationships with other people, it's like a setup for failure. And again, everybody's not super friendly and have a whole bunch of 15 people I can call, but having someone that you can reach out to and have a conversation with that's not that particular person is crucial to just life in general. And again, there's levels to it. You got to tell your business to everybody and everybody's your best friend because they're not. But you want to make sure that you have something that you can do or someone you can turn to when that love gets tough. Any questions, any comments, concerns there?
Yeah, I think those top two, name what you feel and then seek wise support. I think, like for instance, on Sunday, there was something that wasn't done right, and so I had somebody to come up to the pulpit, straighten out the issue that was going on during worship. And I was thinking to myself, this would be an amazing opportunity because I'm sure people in the congregation was wondering, why did I have that person come and do that? And I was like, this would be an amazing teaching opportunity because there's a lot of things that happen in our church that sometimes people just don't understand. And this would be an amazing teaching opportunity to explain, this is why I had that person to come and do what they did. But then I also had to consider the people that had that responsibility that I had a certain expectation for, how would it make them feel? And so even though it might be a good teaching moment, it might be pretty embarrassing, to the people that had that responsibility. And so the wisdom has to be a part of what we do, and so even though we want to name it how we feel, that's extremely important. It's extremely important also to know that we have to use wisdom. And so I had an opportunity to talk with one of the people that had that responsibility today, and I kind of shared everything. I was like, and they already knew why I did what I did, and I was sharing. I was like, to myself, I was thinking that this might be a great teaching moment, so that other people can understand, and then just to give them a little bit more insight on worship and symbolism and things like that. And I was like, but I thought that it might not go over well because I didn't know how your group would feel. And so she was like, Pastor, I'm so thankful that you didn't do that. She was like, because that would be pretty embarrassing. And I think we got it. The simple fact that you had to get somebody to do it, we got it. But yeah, that would have been pretty embarrassing. And so I think you always got to make sure you give room to allow wisdom to move also. And when you're making decisions on how to address certain expectations, and when people fall short of those expectations, you have to use wisdom.
Yeah, no, you're 100% correct. I'm learning that as a young father. I don't know if I qualify as a young father at my age, but a father with young children, there's a lot of things that I'm like, hey, we got to tighten up in my brain. And I used to be like I'm on them. But I'm just realizing the different personalities. I think it kind of goes with what you're saying. It's like I've recognized the different personalities of my children, and so each child responds differently to a different thing. And so I don't want them to. I think I remember a couple years ago I wanted to publicly apologize for something that I did to my son publicly. I was like, hey, you know what? He was embarrassed by the situation. I didn't have to do him that way. Let me apologize publicly so that he'll, see the example of me doing that. But then also I feel like, hey, in order to repair that relationship a certain way, I needed to do that. So long story short, I'm just realizing, like you're saying, like, hey, I could treat everybody the same way, and I can go off and say this and say that and be this way, and it'll be ineffective. And it'll also probably hurt more feelings. And so it's just having to adjust of, dealing with these precious children in a way that, they do the things, but out of love and wanting to make sure that, I don't lower their self-esteem and I raise them up properly. I do have to, like you said, take those moments before I do anything, let me take a step back and make sure that I'm handling the situation as appropriate, in an appropriate way, and also doing it in a way that child will receive it. And, and it's no different for adults. Like adults feel the same way. Like people like to fight. You come to them the wrong way. That's all it takes. You know what I mean? So I think it takes wisdom in managing people. And you're very right on that. Like that was definitely, I don't know if it took a lot in you to do it that way, or if it just came natural, or the spirit spoke to you. But I feel like if we do that more often, things would probably be better with our relationships with people. Cool. All right, and so we'll slide to the next slide. And so we're talking about discernment questions for your relationship. And so when we're talking about this idea of, hey, I'm in this relationship, I feel like it's one-sided. I feel like I'm putting in all the effort. I feel like it's on me to make things happen. I'm feeling like if I don't do this, if I don't do that, I won't receive any love back. There's things that we need to ask ourselves to make sure that, hey, you know what? Let's think about the situation and make sure it's one that's beneficial and something that I should be participating in. And so you have a situation where, question one, in this relationship, what is healthy and good, and what is consistently hurting me? So again, if you're thinking about, hey, I'm in this relationship, it's feeling one-sided. Are there healthy things and are there good things that are happening in this relationship? And it's the exercise, like, hey, write it down. This is healthy, this is healthy, this is healthy. This is good, this is good, this is good. And then you weigh it. You don't have to weigh it in contrast to, but you want to make sure, okay, what are the things that are consistently hurting me in this relationship, right? So you're like, hey, I got the healthy stuff, I got the good stuff, I got the stuff that's consistently hurting me. And the reason why I think these things are good to write down, because one, it shouldn't be a measure of tipping the scales. Like, well, this is slightly hurts me a little bit more, but when it's good, it's good. You hear people talk about those type of relationships all the time. When it's good, it's good, but when it's bad, it's bad. And they have the new phrase for it now, toxic. So we're in these toxic relationships because when it's good, it's good, but when it's bad, it's bad. But when you're in this one-sided situation, to bring some clarity to whether or not this is really bad, and it needs to, to end, or we need to figure something else out, or seek counseling or whatever, you want to weigh the totality of the relationship about what's good and what's healthy and what's consistently hurting me. Again, for some discernments about the type of relationship and the quality and the health of the relationship. Secondly, what have I been afraid to say or change because I fear losing the person? And again, we got to think about, how we're moving. Are we not setting boundaries? Are we not, showing concern for our own well-being? Do we find ourselves in situations that are compromising our faith? Do we cross moral boundaries? Do we do unethical things for this person because we fear losing that person? And so you really want to write down and think about, hey, what have I been afraid to say or change because I fear losing that person? And if the fear of losing that person is more important than doing right, more important than having healthy conversations, more important than changing something that needs to change, then that's probably a sign that relationship isn't healthy. And again, it may be a sign of that relationship doesn't need to continue. But again, these are discernment questions to kind of start to facilitate change and see what needs to be done. And then the next one is what boundary or small shift would honor both God and my mental health. So if you're in a situation where you feel as if this one-sided relationship or the content, I don't know if that's the right word, but just this conversation, not conversation, this relationship isn't really what I think it should be. What ways can you set boundaries or make shifts in the relationship that honor both God and your mental health? Because oftentimes, again, if we're talking about compromising, if we're talking about this relationship isn't something I need to be involved in, or I'm not doing what I need to do, we need to figure out, hey, I need to honor God in this relationship. What do I need to do? I need to set boundaries. What do I need to do? And especially when you know your mental health is being challenged. Oftentimes we'll recognize stress, we'll recognize anxiety, we'll recognize we're slipping in depression, we'll recognize all these things that are happening to ourselves, but we won't do anything about it because we're afraid that person, again, will leave us. And so we have to be, we got to prioritize. And our health and our mental health is definitely the priority. And then lastly, do I need pastoral or professional help to discern whether this relationship is safe or sustainable? And, this may seem like an obvious, like, aha, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes we're in very terrible, toxic, hurtful relationships that aren't safe, physically, mentally, emotionally, all those different things, or sustainable. Again, if we're talking about one-sided love, some things are not sustainable. And again, it's going to lead to wearing out. It's going to lead to tapping out. It's going to lead to passing out. Like, all the outs are going to happen because of this relationship. And so if this thing isn't sustainable, we really need to have some conversation with some people to be like, hey, help me understand what I'm doing wrong. Let me help me understand what I can do better. Or help me understand that this person ain't who they pretend to be, or who they say they be, or who they should be. And let's think about ways in which that maybe we need to, exit out of this situation. And so these are, not the end all be all to all questions, but I think these are a good starting point to kind of think it through and using discernment on whether or not these relationships are healthy, whether they're toxic, whether we need to make some adjustments or set some boundaries. So again, is this in this relationship, what is healthy and good, and what is constantly hurting me? What have I been afraid to say or change because I fear losing the person? What boundary or small shift would honor both God and my mental health? And then, do I need pastoral professional help to discern whether this relationship is safe or sustainable? And again, if it's not pastoral or professional, having somebody wise in your corner that you can have these conversations with, I think is also very important. Any questions, any comments, concerns? Let me push back on these 4 questions that I have here. Discernment questions.
So it was something, I can't remember exactly what it was, but but it was something you said earlier where we were almost kind of classifying relationships. So and really defining, understanding that relationship that you have. And so say for example, there's a older preacher. I know that he's older. He's there's probably some cognitive decline that's going on, and so he's probably not the best person to get engaged in a conversation with, and you have to just kind of just understand and say yes a lot. Don't try to reason. Just give him somebody to talk to, and so when I'm dealing with him, you know, based on where I am and how much time I have, I just won't answer the calls because I know what they. But I can't do that with my wife because that's a whole different classification of the relationship, and so I think it's good to be real clear on how you classify this relationship. And there's some relationships to where you don't have to pick up every time they call, you know, and you didn't make a till death do us part, agreement, in those relationships right there. Those relationships right there are totally different, and so and I don't feel guilty, when I choose not to answer those calls. That's why I have an answer machine on my phone. But I don't feel guilty because I'm real clear on how on the classification of that relationship. And I think I can't remember what it was, but just just being real clear on how you classify it, and not trying to 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 have everybody at the same level of relationships.
Mhm.
Everybody doesn't merit the same type of attention in different relationships.
Yeah, yeah. Now, and I don't know if this is exactly what you're talking about, but it does remind me of the point of like, hey, some relationships are mentor-mentee, some relationships are, give and take, some relationships are, hey, this person, I just listen to what they got to say. And when they're done talking, I'm like, all right, cool, because I'm here just to be a listening ear. And so, yeah, 100%, like everybody doesn't get the same attention. And that's what happens too. Like when you're trying to win the approval of the person you don't need to be winning the approval of, or win the love over, win over, you find yourselves in those situations where now you're compromising your time and you're not spending the time with your wife that you need to because this person called you every 5 minutes and you feel like you got to jump on the phone to have that conversation. So you're absolutely right. You definitely, wisdom gives us those qualifications and those I won't say boundaries, but just knowing the hierarchy of relationships. And when we don't do that, we can definitely find ourselves, doing too much, for sure. Any other questions, comments, concerns, pushback? Okay, well then we'll jump into the last slide. So final tips and takeaways, right? So when we think about what's next, we've had this conversation about boundaries. We had this conversation about, hey, hierarchy of relationships. We had this conversation about let the answer machine catch the message. We've had a conversation about love. This love feels one-sided, and I don't know what particularly to do. I don't know how to make the situation better. I don't, all these different things, right? And so I think for me, I'm always going to push normalizing counseling as a tool God can use to bring healing, not a sign of weak faith. And I mentioned that because oftentimes in my conversations with people that are believers, they will kind of cut themselves out of help-seeking behavior, as we call it, of seeking help, because they feel like it's a sign of weak faith. When they, when they know that the love is, hard, when they know that they're doing a lot, when they know that they're pushing past their limits, when they know they're not setting good boundaries, for whatever reasons, they feel as if, getting help is a sign of weakness, and they got to push further and push harder and push more and do more. And maybe if I do more, things will get better. But no, counseling is the way in which, and getting wise counsel, again, with professional, pastoral, whatever the case may be, is a way in which God can use to bring healing. Counseling is not about you're crazy or you got a problem or whatever all the time. Sometimes you just need clarity, and you need to be able to see things from perspectives that somebody else can help you see. And when we're in situations where sometimes we get tunnel vision, when we're going through a situation or love is feeling one-sided, we're locked in onto this thing and we can't see anything else that's going on. And so counseling allows us to see, or allows the blinders to come down and the tunnel vision to go away, so that we can see, again, the 360 view and be able to say, oh, okay, that makes sense. Oh, I shouldn't do that. Oh, this is not, this is a thing. And we still have this issue in the church in 2026. And then especially, as Black people, where we just don't see the value in counseling because we think it's a sign of weak faith. And I don't think it's a sign of weak faith. I think it's a sign of wisdom to get counseling and be, again, wise counseling, whatever that looks like. And so when we're dealing with things, again, especially love feeling one-sided and burning ourselves out, wearing ourselves out, and not setting good boundaries with people, counseling is the way to do that. Remembering that you are deeply loved by God, even when human love feels uneven or absent. Again, don't be like my, 10-year-old daughter's friend who's already in 6th grade looking for love in all the wrong places. When we understand and when we know, when we delve into the love that is God, reading, praying, fasting, doing all the things, being in relationships, sometimes just listening, sometimes just being out in nature and watching the breeze. Well, you can't watch the breeze blow, but feeling the breeze go by and looking at the things and looking at marveling at God's creation. And when we understand that we're deeply loved by God, that trumps human love, that uneven love, that love that's absent. Again, it's not to say to continue to be in relationships that love is uneven or love is absent. But it's more to say that if you were in, again, a relationship that you want to fight for and a relationship that's worth fighting for, first start with that feeling and that connection to God. And then from there, figure out what it looks like to be in that relationship with that person, and where you can kind of, make things better and figure things out. But again, if you don't have that deeply rooted love and have that understanding, it's human behavior to seek love in places where maybe we shouldn't, and to push further when love feels uneven or when it's absent. And then again, seeking help, setting boundaries, or grieving a relationship can all be acts of faith. So it doesn't, again, affect your faith by seeking help, having conversations, trying to figure out why does love feel so one-sided and why you feel so bad. Setting boundaries, again, setting boundaries is something that Jesus himself did. It's something that we got to do when necessary. And then, or grieving, hey man, sometimes this relationship, it just ain't gonna work. And it's gotta go. And you gotta cut people off, and you gotta go about your business. And that's an act of faith, because if we try to hold on to that thing that God is telling us to let go of, or that person is showing us that we need to let it go of, even without God directly speaking, it's to get out of that takes faith. It requires faith, especially when you so dependent on that love, or you want to feel that love. Stepping away from that thing it can be an act of faith. And so again, seeking help, setting boundaries, or grieving a relationship can all be acts of faith. Excuse me. And then again, at the end, prayer. My goal in this conversation is definitely for healing to take place, for people to understand that, hey, love, even if it feels one-sided, there is hope. I always, ask God to show up in this place, and that wisdom, hopefully that some wisdom was gained from this experience. And then also courage for next steps. Like if you need courage for the next steps, seeking that counsel, seeking the Lord, having conversation with people. My prayer is that we will have that courage for the next step. So healing, praying that God, does what he does, praying for wisdom for all of us to make a decision when it comes to love, especially with this one-sided conversation, and that we have the courage for next steps. Whether that's seeking help, setting boundaries, or getting rid of the dead weight. Any comments, questions, concerns?
I think, and indirectly, I mean, you might not realize what you're doing, but I think when you do these things, you set boundaries. Sometimes you say, "Hey, I can't do it anymore. It's not good for me." Sometimes you don't realize how much, because sometimes we stay in a situation for the other person, because how the other person, might be affected by ending the relationship. But sometimes by setting those boundaries, sometimes you allow the other person an opportunity to learn, because they've been allowed to do whatever for however long, in different relationships, and so sometimes you I think sometimes you can actually help the other person by setting standards and boundaries. And I go back to my first marriage. I got married at 19. I still had milk around my milk around my mouth at 19 when I got married, and I was married for about 9 years. But I mean, if you could talk about a poster child for how not to do it, I mean, I was that poster child, of how not to do it, and so, but I think that what allowed me the opportunity to become the man that God wanted me to be. I mean, I was a provider and all that kind of stuff. I had that stuff down, but just this emotional and mental, all that. I think by her leaving me, setting those boundaries, like what, I can't deal with it anymore. By leaving, it put me in a place to where I was I mean, that's when I met God. That's when I met Jesus. And I don't think I don't. I mean, you never know what would happen, but I don't see myself. I didn't see myself coming to Jesus before finding out, that my kids were not going to be living with me anymore. And so sometimes you can actually help somebody by discontinuing the I'll call it the crippleization, by discontinuing the crippleization of that person. And so I think it's real helpful. You might not realize it, but to do these things that you're talking about, setting boundaries, and for your own mental health, deciding that I can't take anymore. And so it seems that you're doing it for you, but you might be helping that person not to be um, disciplined enough to ensure that they don't hurt other people.
Hmm. No, that's 100%. I feel like it's a valuable lesson that we are kind of losing sight of just as a society. We are in a space where it is, where a lot of people are, I don't want to say coddled, but again, there's always going to be somebody that pushes against, oh, just because that's the way they did it, then don't make it right. But I feel like a lot of times now we're losing a lot of young people because we're not training them right. We're not loving them enough. We're not letting them learn lessons. We're not letting them bump their head. And so, like you said, that's a perfect example. If that experience hadn't happened, would you be where you are now? You know what I'm saying? Would you have had that experience enough to change your ways and come to know the Lord and all those different things? So, we can definitely do a disservice to people when we are engaged in relationships longer than we should, 100%. And I think, it's unfortunate that we see a lot of people that will hold on to, again, toxic relationships or be in spaces where they shouldn't because, again, they're afraid of how that other person will turn out. And so now what? Now, and what happens a lot of times, now you dead or you got stressed out or you ended up in the hospital, whatever the case may be, because you was worried about how that was going to affect the other person, and they going about their business. The minute you drop dead, the minute you ended up in the hospital, the minute whatever happens, they gone. And you was too busy worried about how, what was going to happen with that person if you did the right thing by you and getting out of the situation. So yeah, I definitely agree 100%. Like it takes all of that. It takes rock bottom sometimes for some people, and it takes getting out of relationships, and it takes setting boundaries and all that stuff. And if we do that more often, I feel like we'll be in better space and better shape. That was it for me. I didn't know if there was any more questions, comments, concerns, anything else that anybody wanted to share or add. But I think, again, the encouragement is if you feel like you're in a one-sided relationship, we've got tools, we got things, go back and watch again. There's ways in which we can, seek counsel. We can ask questions of ourselves. We can use discernment in our questions and when we're thinking about the relationship. But there's a lot of tools that we can use to make sure that we're not participating in a situation where love is one-sided.
Amen. All right. Well, I appreciate you, John. I appreciate you finishing up that conversation, which I think is going to be really helpful. If you know somebody that's going through some issues dealing with one-sided relationships, feeling like it's a one-sided relationship, and a need to take a spiritual look, and a mental health look, at relationships and love, definitely forward this email, forward this video to them, and it might be an opportunity for them to break free of a cycle that's really in a negative way impacted their mental health. But I want to thank everybody for joining us, and pray that the peace of God be with you always. God bless you, and have a great one.
Thank you.